Pre-planning grants are really critical to launching high-quality, innovative schools because current educators are the folks who are really best positioned to understand the needs of their communities and to design schools that are going to meet those needs. But for a current educator, they're not going to have the personal financial resources to, for example, take a leave of absence from the classroom for a year to develop a high-quality charter application. Creating a new funding source, a public funding source for this, will really help diversify the pipeline of educators who can launch their own schools, so that people of color, folks from low-income backgrounds, from rural areas who may have less access to philanthropic funding can have access to public funding that will support them as they develop a school that really serves the needs of their community.
You know, having access to funding, there are so many different levels of that. And for me, as a leader of color and as a child of poverty, although I had a very successful career in the traditional education sector, I didn't have this lavish bank account that would allow me to, like, how do you step away from your traditional job and now pursue this? Had I known probably what all it took to do this, I don't know in hindsight how eager I would have been to do it, because once you stepped out, the funding wasn't immediately there.
What's happened, because I had the ability to have that be like my sole concentration, is there's things I wrote in 2015, 16 that are like literally happening exactly as written, because the thought and dedication that went into that is that it wasn't just to get through a process, it was actually to be a roadmap. And so for anything to be really successful, I think people do need to kind of put down what they're doing and give the task some respect. Without funding, most people can't. You know, if they are in the education field, which is where most of us come from, that are trying to found schools, you know, we wouldn't be able to just put our jobs down and do that.
Yeah, funding is so important to the success of schools, especially in their early stages, because there's so much to learn, and navigating everything from facilities to, you know, managing board to, you know, learning about your district and the needs that are going to be required from you at the local and the state level. It's just a large learning curve. And to be able to have the funding to alleviate the challenges that may come your way. Currently, over 70% of the children in charter schools are children of color. And we know that when children of color are educated by leaders of color, there is an increased impact in a positive way for those students. And so it's really important for us to prioritize leaders of color leading and being supported to operate, to run high-performing schools. And in order to do that, we have to properly fund and invest in them. The reality of like all of the different challenges that you'll navigate in that process to be able to create a successful school is lightened significantly when you have the funding and the resources to support you to navigate that process.
Leaders of color are systematically the least supported from philanthropy when it comes to charter schools and education funding in general. And so the students that we serve, low-income students, particularly in major cities, but even in rural areas, are also the least funded public schools. And so what does that then mean? What that produces is a gargantuan gap in funding and inequity. And what we can't necessarily rely on is the private sector to fill that gap. So public financing is essential. It is the only democratic way where we have an opportunity to begin to get the resources that we need to be able to serve our young people effectively. We are advocating for the opportunity to serve our kids best. And when we do that, it says to us that our leaders recognize that the work that we do is important and is worth investing in leadership like ours.
If I'm a current classroom teacher, if I run an after-school program, if I have another community-based education experience that allows me to understand the needs of my community, then I would be eligible for these funds. So this is really a pipeline of resources to support people who are closest to the challenges, who can understand them and understand how to innovate and need them, to have access to public funding to make this possible.